Okay, thank you for that. We'll resume the committee meeting, and thank you, Councillor Gillen, for your introductions there. We'll follow standing orders. Our question was asked in terms of writer replies, etc. You'll be able to respond to questions, obviously, and also staff, if they're required, they're quite happy to come up as well. Okay, so just to remind everybody that if you do want to ask a question, try and use the resolve. It just makes it so much easier for the team up the front here to keep track of who wants to ask a question. If you do this, I might just try and indicate that you put it through the correct systems. So we've got a speaking order starting to emerge, and we'll be kicking off with the Deputy Mayor, moving on to Councillor Patterson-Hamlin, then Councillor Hills, then Councillor Foley at this stage. Okay, so on that note, if you're ready.
Thanks, Chair. Can I address my questions to staff?
Yeah.
Oh, where are they?
Okay, which ones do you want? Finance or mayoral office?
I'll do it with Ross. Okay.
Okay.
So thank you very much, and thank you very much, Councillors Gillen and Burns. My question to staff, because I think these two councillors have spent a lot of time putting some very good ideas together about how we can potentially save some money. So my question to you is, how many of these suggestions are you already looking at to help meet the savings target of 106 million as per the Mayor's budget?
So quite a number of these things are things that have been looked at to achieve the current year efficiency savings and the 106 million in there. So things like looking at travel budgets, catering budgets, advertising subscriptions, workforce management, vacancy rates, external consulting, professional services, those kind of things, looking at delivered differently, and those kind of things, procurement, and obviously a lot of focus through the Value for Money Committee on procurement processes and overseeing large procurement. So there's a lot of things in here that are already being progressed as part of the work on the 106 million savings. So we need to be careful that we're not double counting anything. We can't use them to fund savings over and above. Things like looking at depreciation funding or things that sort of get into services like reducing major events, those are not things that we're looking at because they require political approval.
Thank you. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson-Hamlin.
Thank you. I've got a few questions. Unsure which will be to the mover and which will be to staff, I guess case by case. So I guess starting with the VIII, so 8. Might not be surprised, this is where I'll start. Pausing all regional contestable and targeted grants rounds for 1 year. So I understand that the aim is just regional. However, most of the non-profits who apply for regional also apply for local board grants, both of which rounds are very oversubscribed at the moment in a context in which all grants rounds across the city are oversubscribed. So how are the local boards going to be able to cope with having additional oversubscription if that clause goes ahead?
You're asking me to answer on behalf of the local boards? Because
Just wondering if you had any ideas.
well, the local boards will need to determine that themselves. I mean, just bear in mind, please, that all of the suggestions in here are requests for more information on the impacts from the Chief Executive. So at that point, we can make a decision on it. It's not actually cutting those things now or deferring those things now. It's requesting advice back if you have a look at the amendment.
Yeah, I guess if we're requesting advice around that, it's important to understand what the mover and seconder are envisaging there. So now, I'm not accusing you of cancelling Christmas at all, but some of the regional contestable grants went towards Santa Parade, Circability, Diabetes Foundation, Age Concern, Lake House Arts, Auckland Pride, Polyfest, EcoFest. We're pausing all this for a year. What do we envisage happens to those events and others like it? How is this going to help social cohesion in any way?
Well, it's an unusual question. No, we're not pausing all this for 1 year, as you've said. We are requesting advice on what the impact would be, and it may well be that when this comes back to the Budget Committee that we decide not to progress with that. But it needs to be on the table because we are currently investing public money into these things, and we need to be looking at the suite of options to see if there's any way that we should be making changes or not.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking. So now moving on from grants, so the X10, your suggestion 10 there, lowering or removing the Green Star certification requirement on new builds. This is probably a question more for staff. So my understanding is that applies to new build council-owned buildings in excess of $10 million. I think that's right. Do we have any idea how much that might cost in terms of the ongoing OPEX that we then wouldn't be saving by having that Green Star certification?
We have not quantified that to my knowledge at this stage, so we'd have to report back as the amendment requests of us.
Am I right that it's generally predicted to be around 20% of ongoing OPEX?
I understand that's about right in terms of the downstream, there's a trade-off here obviously in terms of OPEX savings downstream and capital cost up front, so it's the interaction between those two things that we'd have to have a look at.
Thank you very much. I'll leave it there for now.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hills.
Kia ora, Councillor. What do you mean by deferring the 7 million major events fund shortfall?
So there's staff advice that there is a between $4 and $7 million shortfall in the major events fund, and so part of the rates increase would be to cover off that. So what I've included in here is a list of options to be reported back to us with the ramifications, the pros and cons, so we can fully consider that. Just the same as with the grants.
But what do you mean by deferring? So you can't defer a shortfall. It would just be cutting the $7 million and ending all those events this year. What do you mean by deferring $7 million shortfall?
Well, deferring means to defer it and reconsider, and it could be through the long-term plan or it could be considering it through the following year's budget. But again, that would be the advice that we come back to. And it may well be the Budget Committee doesn't want to do that. But we need to actually understand and consider these things. I mean, we're facing the biggest rates rise in Super City history, and we need everything on the table and actually properly delve in and discuss what we're going to do here.
But do you understand what deferring to 7 million
Point of order, Mr Chair, please.
No, but I'm trying to understand what that
No,
means.
I'm raising a point of order.
What's the point of order?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Well, I'll address the point of order to the Chair,
Yeah,
if
I'm
you don't
listening.
mind.
I'm listening, Councillor.
So under point of order 3.14.7, there's a clause there where speakers are asked or questioners not to repeat themselves. So this is the third time I've heard this same question asked. We're going into the realms of the Spanish Inquisition here, Mr Chair. The question's been asked, it's been answered. I wouldn't like to see a situation where we have essentially debating taking place as opposed to finding out answers to specific questions.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll keep an eye on that. So back to you, Councillor.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's just important, as I've only seen this 5 p.m. yesterday, so just want to understand what we're voting on. But do you understand that the 7 million, like that, would mean those events don't happen next year from 1 July? So ASB Classic would not continue, Pacifica would not continue, Diwali would not continue. The Warriors game announced yesterday, Anzac Test at Eden Park, the All Blacks, they wouldn't happen, because if you move that to a different year, the 7 million is not available for those events.
Well, I assume that information will be included in the Chief Executive's response to this motion if this amendment passes.
Okay, I guess my question is then to staff. I don't know if it's to Phil or Ross or someone else, but the 7 million mentioned in the budget, the way I read it is we're filling that shortfall for 1 year to make sure those events are funded. So if we deferred that 7 million to a different year, those events will just not happen. Or we're at risk of not happening, some of the ones that get smaller amounts of funding.
Happy to answer. I mean, I'm not quite sure what a defer a shortfall means, but I would interpret that as meaning you're deferring the expenditure on the events until the revenue is there to cover it. This is aligned to, I guess, consultation we did as part of the 25-26 annual budget, where we asked people's feedback on whether they supported a bed night visitor levy and had options around, well, what if we didn't fund that 7 million shortfall, or what if we had a visitor night levy and could fund more? Under that scenario at the time, and this was it's a little bit out of date, it is going back a couple of years, but at that time, without the 7 million of events funding, you could proceed with the Lantern Festival, Pacifica and Diwali, but nothing else on the calendar. So that would be the Minor Auckland Festival, the ASB Classic, Auckland Marathon, Symphony, New Zealand Fashion Week, Explore, Comedy Festival, Auckland Writers Festival. Those are the ones that would be, not able to be funded without a 7 million. So that was the advice at the time.
That's
but
what
we'd have to see, what the actual proposal is at the time.
That's what I thought, and that's why I asked a couple of times. Thank you. The freeze on non-essential staff. What is your definition of non-essential staff?
Well, that would come through in the advice from the Chief Executive.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Councillor Hills, I'm not going to sit here and discuss staff.
Cool. You're not going to sit here and discuss what, sorry?
Discuss staff matters. If this is adopted, this would be a requirement for the Chief Executive to report back on this.
Okay. The lowering or removing the Green Star certification requirement, obviously that comes with, and you'd know because Northcote Community Centre and Library in Kaipatiki is going to be Green Star. What will you do with the OPEX loss? So it's about a 60% cheaper energy and about 50% cheaper on water. So what would you do to cover the OPEX increase?
I feel like I'm giving the same answer, but for all of these items that are listed here, they are options that, if this committee supports it, would be requesting the advice from the Chief Executive on how to deal with these items. And there may be others as well. These are just ones that I'm proposing to request specific advice on, the pros and cons, the implications, so that we can make a full and robust decision as we should be doing.
Thank you. Okay, the other question, just on the contestable and targeted grant rounds for 1 year, two questions. One, so are you saying that we would increase the rates again next year to bring them back? And what regional grants are you talking about?
What do you mean, what regional grants? So all regional contestable and targeted grant rounds, there's a number of them, and they total millions. They need to be, I'm requesting, again, the Chief Executive comes back with the implications for that, and then when it resumes, that would be a matter for the committee to decide.
Okay, and have you checked with any of the groups that
That would be a bit inappropriate.
Inappropriate? Okay. The other question I just have for Ross before we move on, so the freeze on filling non-essential staff, that's already done as part of the budget, as from Councillor Deputy Mayor's question. That's already part of the end of, in our current savings plan, that already is done. That's correct, isn't it?
I guess not phrased as that sort of non-essential staff, but what there is in terms of the schedules that we're working towards in terms of finding the 106 million of savings, there are some line items we're working towards. One of them is looking at the workforce management, strategic workforce management. So it's kind of like, what is the right level of staffing? How do we get the the most output and optimise staffing levels wherever possible. So there's very much a focus on how do we contain staffing levels, optimise staff levels. Part of that is agility and redeploying resources, all those kind of things. So there's a lot of work looking at how do we optimise staff costs. In terms of the essential versus non-essential, that does require a bit of a definition.
Cool. And then the last question, just on the lowering the level of contingency. As far as I know, that is something we already account for too. So you might have 100 projects over 10 years, we do 10 a year, but if the contingency is not taken up, we move one of those projects, and it might be 11 in this year because we've been able to, like, it's just moving the capital program forward. It's not a pure circle, as far as I know. Like, we don't count it as an OPEX saving.
Councillor, there's a couple of things here. You're right that in order to optimise, if you like, the capital program, we have, Plan B projects sitting there, and if time allows to accelerate in the event that something falls over. So that's an aspect of contingency. But I think what Councillor Gillen's talking to here is the provision within project budgets for contingency. There is an aspect that is already pulled across the capital program. You'll see it itemised in terms of discrete business cases for projects. So, there might be an opportunity there. I think it's in the category of probably already being required for the existing savings target, but there is something to explore there, yes.
Thank you.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
Mr. Chair, I wondered if you could take some better management of this meeting in relation to the way in which this exchange on the questions is going. I think that the questions need to be succinct either to the officers or to the mover of the amendment.
Sorry, Daniel.
Yeah, it is.
Sorry, Daniel, just which point can you get to, so we can find the reference number for the point of order?
My question is for you, is for you to ensure relevance of the questions to either the officers or to the mover of the amendment, because a lot of this preamble, it's political debate, and you are allowing this to continue.
I'd like you, if you raise a point of order for any councillor, I'd like you to be very
Otherwise,
specific
we
to
will
try and do a
all
point of
do
order.
these preambled questions.
Thank you.
Unless you can keep the
Daniel,
questions relevant.
I don't want to stop you midstream, but I will. Okay. Points of order need to be points of order. Now, I'll come to what I say next. What I was going to come to, just listening to the exchanges, was that you may, councillor, continue to answer questions in the way that you have been saying, I'm waiting for the report. I'm saying the advice is a report. I'm suspecting you may have to continue to do that with the questions that are coming forward to you. On the flip side, however, I think it's quite helpful that for the CE to be hearing the type of questions from councillors to help him fully fledge out his report and his response to you. Right? So I'm quite prepared for the questions to be asked by the councillors relative to your motion. How you answer them, I think you're trying to make a very clear point that it's coming back to the Chief Executive and you can't answer specific questions. So I wouldn't be surprised if your answers need to continue in the same line. But I will continue with the questions. Okay, thank you. Councillor Foley.
Kia ora, thanks, Chair. I've got a very specific question for staff. How much will the average household look to save in real terms, in dollars and cents per week, by the 2% reduction that's being proposed in the amendment?
Staff might be figuring out the exact numbers. It's about $80 per year, so it's whatever that is per week.
And my second question relates to a question I'd asked earlier. How will this amendment affect the shortfall for the 7 local boards, so the $6 million, given that in the original resolution it says that the filling of the funding shortfall gap is contingent on the Mayor's proposal being passed?
Yeah, I guess we don't have enough information yet on exactly what this is, so we have to go and give advice around all of these things. Some of these things, staff, non-essential staff vacancies would include those that support community activities and local boards. So there's a range of things here that relate to an impact on community and local board budgets. So we'd have to kind of work through the process to determine what impacts are for local boards of all this.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Baker.
Thanks, Greg. Questions for you, John. I'll be succinct. Can you confirm that the 166 million made up of the existing 106 plus a 60 made up of the 9 points in E, is that correct? That's how you make up the 60? Is through
what,
those?
sorry?
So you want to add the 60 that you want to add to the 106 is made up of any one of a combination of those points 9. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, to be determined by the Budget Committee, yes. So that's correct, yes. Request that information come through and the Budget Committee can accept or reject those to make up the 60 million, yes.
So bearing in mind that we are accepting in points part C and D, the 166 million saving, what happens if the CEO reports back, as you've said, his response, every answer you've given has been, this is up to the CEO to report back. What happens if the CEO reports back and says, actually, we can't make up the 60 million out of those D? What happens then? Because we've already tied in through your resolution 166. What happens?
Well, that sounds more like a question for legal staff, but my assume that they would come back with a report recommending revisiting the situation.
My final question is, last week at the workshop I asked if there were any amendments, and it was the chair made a pretty firm and clear direction. Why did we not get the amendment and the financial analysis that was also asked for? Why did we not get that until 4:45 last night?
Yes, I saw your video on Facebook.
No,
The
I don't use
question-
Facebook like that.
The answer to the question is that it hadn't been prepared at that point, so there was nothing to show you at that point. And it has come up a number of times today about the timing here. Every one of us around this table can put forward an amendment at the meeting. You can put forward the amendment any time prior to the meeting. The chair of the Budget Committee at that workshop invited us to circulate it prior to the meeting, just to give staff a heads up. I did that. It went to the Chief Executive, who then, I understand, passed it on to the finance team, and I sent that through Saturday night, okay? So once I had that information through, once I had that information through, then it got circulated to everyone.
Thank you. Councillor Ferry.
Thank you. I apologise to Councillor Newman. I have a slight preamble because I just want people to be aware outside this room or away from the table how this process usually works, which is that ordinarily through the workshops, councillors seek advice. They ask staff questions, sometimes by email as well. Those are collated and presented back to us collectively. And so the idea of a list of this nature being circulated and discussed before we got to this point is not uncommon. So my question then to the mover is in relation to a couple of specific items on this, because we have not had an opportunity to do that beforehand as we normally would. And I do agree that an amendment is usually put up in a meeting or just before a meeting, but we don't normally get lists like this in an amendment. So this is why I think you're experiencing some interrogation of the list. So my overarching question is then to the mover, why didn't you seek advice on this list through the normal process of workshops?
Well, thank you for the question, Councillor. As a representative, and as we all are, we're entitled to we don't have to follow the existing process that has been put in place by previous governing bodies. Okay, so yes, we can discuss things at workshops, we can raise questions there, we can raise questions offline. So the way this has happened is that it's been circulated to staff prior to this meeting, we've received back financial advice and comments from the Chief Executive. Those have been distributed to everyone in the committee prior to this meeting, so you've been able to absorb that as well as the proposal going out today. So thank you.
Supplementary then. Given that the idea here is that we vote on, as Councillor Baker's pointed out, a savings target of 166 million, that includes 60 million that is to come from this list. What happens until we get that advice that answers this list? What happens with things that are in flight?
So I can give a response, but you may also want a response from staff. So it'd be very similar to the proposal the Mayor has put forward to take savings, but those savings have been unidentified so far, and we've heard that they haven't all been identified. Exactly the same. So we're identifying there's additional savings required. There's some suggestions here that we're requesting information back from the Chief Executive, and it'll be up to the Budget Committee to decide on whether those are what we want to include or not. I'm happy to hear from staff.
Yeah, thank you. I would appreciate some advice from staff because some of these are in flight. For example, delivering differently. What would happen until we can get that advice and bring it back to a further vote at budget and performance? It's effectively saying, we're passing a budget today, but we're not passing all of the budget today. So I'm quite nervous about that.
So, I mean, our recommendation in terms of how you would make this work and try to create a credible budget for the year going ahead and be able to proceed confidently to turn this into something that we can rely on would be for the Budget and Performance Committee to meet before the end of the financial year, before the end of June, get advice on these things and make some of those calls prior to the final adoption of the budget and setting rates at the end of June. So a quick process to work through these things. In the meantime, that might mean some things. The prudent thing might be to hold off and delay some of the things on this list where possible. If we didn't take that approach and then we let this drag into the next year, then it would create a lot more risk that these things would not be achievable, and that would leave a lot of uncertainty for more of these things for a long period of time.
Thank you. And this is a question for staff in a similar vein. While we have been able to receive some finance advice, has there been time between the amendment and right now to be able to get subject matter expert advice? I know finance team have been ready to go. This is their day job. They might have liked more time and might have been able to give us more information had they had more time. But have we been able to get what's called SME advice?
Generalising, no, not yet.
Right. Okay. So going into a couple of specifics. So we have the $7 million events issue, which has been canvassed a little bit in terms of what it means for specific events. But I have a question around the impact that cutting that would have on the fact that $500,000 of that actually comes from the mayoral budget, which I believe is set on a statutory level, and 2.5 million of it comes from the city centre targeted rate. So that means the full 7 million would not be available as a cut anyway, is that correct? Like it's not a decision we could make today?
I think I'd want to have a more careful look at it than I can answer to now. I mean, you're right that the mayoral budget component, for example, that is set in statute. Of course, the mayor can, that sets a maximum limit rather than a minimum. So there may be flex there, but we haven't done that work yet, councillor.
Thank you. On the delivering differently one, my understanding from the value for money committee item that we had last week before, on value for money, which was quite extensive, and was that the focus for delivering differently at the moment is in the asset decommissioning. So it's effectively working on meeting our asset sales target. That's the focus of the program at the moment. So would cutting or deferring the delivering differently program in the way that is proposed effectively undercut our ability to reach our asset sales target?
It potentially yes, although I suppose just a slight clarification that program does a couple of things. It leads into asset sales questions, but the point was touched on earlier in the meeting. When we consciously don't fully fund the renewals and maintenance of that asset base, we've got to have other strategies around how we manage the overall cost structure down, and the delivering differently mechanism is a key part of that. So you can't somehow unlink it with the decision around the renewals and maintenance funding for our community asset portfolio.
So then is it fair to say that it's also delivering OPEX savings?
If I can just touch on the decommissioning thing in the report that went to the committee the other day, that was specifically around decommissioning assets for local boards where there are some assets that are at the end of their useful life and have ongoing OPEX costs.
Yep.
A number of local boards are very keen to remove those assets, and so this is helping them balance their budgets. The item that went to the Value for Money Committee is there's too many local boards wanting to take advantage of that, and so the item was how we prioritise and figure out which ones to do first. So if we were to stop doing that work, that would mean we wouldn't be able to support the local boards in the way that we intend.
Right, so that would slow down the ability for OPEX and CAPEX savings in that space.
Yes, if we were to defer that part of the Deliver Differently program, that's right.
Okay. And then I have, so with the local board funding aspect that someone raised before, given that we're looking at $6 million, I think it was, that needs to be, that's in the Merrill proposal around sort of addressing that cost pressure issue for those local boards who are particularly impacted by it. Does that effectively mean, and I guess this is a question probably for the mover, that it's $172 million worth of cuts because you've excluded changes to local board budgets? So that makes it 172 million, is that the intention?
Councillor Ferry, no, that is not the intention, and I don't believe you are correct.
Okay, guess that 6 million will just come from somewhere. And then I have a final question, which is in regard to the cuts proposed for, where is it? VIII, which is Roman numeral 8, V3I. Now you're confusing me, Toe. That's okay. 8, all right. Pausing all regional contestable and targeted grant rounds for 1 year. The Community Committee voted on 2 of the grant rounds that are included in the 26-27 budget last year and unanimously supported voting through both of those funding rounds. And I note that Councillors Gillan and Burns are both on that committee and were present for those votes. So how do you intend that would be dealt with for those, when I talk about stuff that's in flight, we have harbour sports, I'm not going to read them all out, but we have, 9 grants of 17 million plus that have been approved from next financial year for a variety of sports facilities. And then we have, how much is this one? $500,000 to a further, I think that's about 8, I'm guessing. So how does that get dealt with in this? That's a question to the mover.
Well, Councillor Ferry, you're referring to grants rounds that have already been approved, not upcoming grants rounds. And while I acknowledge there will be some grants that have been pre-approved, there are also some grants that are multi-year grants. Of course, those things will still be in place. I'm not asking to upend current contracts, etc. However, pausing all future decisions on those grants rounds, that is what this refers to.
So, sorry, you said you're not seeking the cancellation of any contracts, but you're seeking the, sorry, I wasn't going to ask about this, but you raised it. You're ceasing the food scrap collection, but that is a contract that's locked until 2030, I
Councillor
understand?
Ferry, the question you asked me was about the grants rounds, so my answer was within the grants rounds.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's super clear now, thanks. Thank you, Chair.
Happy to oblige, Councillor Ferry.
Thank you. Just the speaking order, it will be Councillor Henderson, followed by Councillor Short, followed by Councillor Newman, followed by the Mayor. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, look, acknowledging the weirdness of asking questions across the table, I'm not sort of super comfortable with it. And, you know, I mean my questions with respect, so I hope you can kind of take it that way, but I still need to know what I'm actually voting on, so aroha mai. But, yeah, look, a lot of the questions around have been answered with, we're going to seek advice on that, right? I just want to first check, on point 1 here, delaying the strategy of fully funding depreciation for a year, we have advice on that on page 15. So I'm just wondering first and foremost whether you agree with staff advice that we've been given, and are you worried about future rate increases to fund increased borrowing costs?
So my understanding from the advice we received earlier on and what we've received in workshops is that the effect of this would be a smoothing of the rates. So I acknowledge that some of these things, if they do get paused, and of course that is a decision of the Budget Committee in this scenario, then they may come back and we need to fund them in the future. But that is something for the Budget Committee to decide on once they receive the full advice from the Chief Executive.
Thank you. So just on the other point around the amendment was sort of seeking advice on these things. None of these things were specifically consulted on through this round of budgets with the public. So how will the public have their say on this list? Are you proposing a second round of consultation?
I'm happy to have a second round of consultation. I mean, the annual plan that was put out there was done, as has been mentioned, was done at a different time. So yes, if we want to go out with a consultation of 5.9%, that's fine. But you'll need to check with staff whether there's timing for that.
And the cost as well. And speaking of cost, look, I'm noticing language here on the top of including but not limited to, and then you've got the list, right? So just wanted to check. Councillor Baker's question earlier was 60 mil from the list. If we can't find it from the list, then what do we do? And I thought it was a very, very fair question. Now, I've noticed it said including but not limited to. So are you envisaging that if we can't find the 60 million here on the screen, then we could find some further service cuts that aren't on the list? Is that the plan?
The wording there is to request the Chief Executive report back on this suite of options, including but not limited to those options. So yes, there may be others the Chief Executive chooses to bring before us. What I wanted to ensure was that these particular ones, which are of concern to a number of councillors around this table and a number of the public, that we do get full answers to this and we have the opportunity to discuss those and vote on those specifically.
Thank you, I appreciate that. My last sort of couple of questions are on J, which is requesting the Chief Executive establish an independent task force to interrogate council finances. So can I first check with you, isn't this already covered by the Value for Money Committee, or is that an addition?
No, the Value for Money Committee is not an independent task force, not to my knowledge.
So the independent task force would be unelected?
Reporting to into the long-term plan process. So the decision-making is sitting with the elected members.
So have you thanks, Toe. Thanks, Toe. Yeah, no, look, so my final cue, I suppose, is have you thought about how you're going to identify members of this task force? And have you also thought about how much it would cost to set up this task force?
So I request, so if this passes, It's requesting the Chief Executive to establish an independent task force with the authority to interrogate council finances to establish potential savings and duplication and report findings back into the long-term plan process. I think that is self-explanatory.
So it sounds like a lot of work. Would they be paid?
I'm sorry, is that a question? Is that a lot of work?
It sounds like a lot of work they're going to do as an independent task force. Will they be paid for their work? Are you envisaging that or not?
Well, I'm eagerly anticipating the Chief Executive's advice on this. But we need to pass this motion first. So when you give your support for that, Shane, we'll be able to find out.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Shaw.
Thank you. Have you socialised your amendments with the local boards in Auckland, and have you, I guess, thought about the ramifications this might have to them as it, this will trickle down?
So no, I haven't circulated this to local boards. I've circulated it to councillors. I have read through the feedback the local boards gave on the annual plan process. And if Councillor Henderson's suggestion about going back out to consultation happens, then I would also hope that we get additional feedback from the local boards.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. Thank you for the answer. Councillor Newman.
Thank you. I've got two questions for the officers, then one for the move. My questions to the officers, and do you have any idea as to what the financial movement would be for the 1 year movement on the depreciation? I presume that would deny us some ability in relation to renewals, but can I just understand, apart from the obvious accounting treatment, do you have any idea on the impact in terms of the actual cash number?
From the earlier advice, the 1 year, if you're talking about the 1 year step up, I think it was about 1.5% of rates, so that's about 45 million of cash. So that means if it was to pause that amount, that would mean that much less rates collected, and then you'd be borrowing to fund asset renewals to that extent. It would then come back in the following year, and as we said earlier, if there was, if that led to impact on the credit rating, that would have other costs as well.
Okay, get all of that. My next question is the implementation with the requirement, of course, to have the budget subject to audit. So how much time is required for that before this thing is signed off by the 30 June? Because we have to have an audited budget ready to go to ensure that we can have supply by 1 July.
So the annual plan does not need to be audited. It's only a long-term plan that needs to be audited. So if something was a long-term plan amendment, that's a whole other process, but generally it doesn't require audit. Practically speaking, we would need decisions and time to be able to put a document together. So it would sort of, be we'd need sort of decisions mid-June or 20th of June kind of thing to give us the time to put together a document and do the rates calculations for you to set rates. But yes, as I said, I guess our advice would be to, if this amendment went through, is for the Budget and Performance Committee to meet pretty soon, and by the middle of June, get the best advice we can on these things and make as many decisions as you can before setting the budget and setting rates. Otherwise, there's a lot of risk if you travel into next year with these things unresolved. Plus, you've got those risks around fuel and risks around the remaining 106 million that still needs to be found.
Okay, look, I thank you, and I didn't appreciate the distinction in relation to the treatment of the audit for the LTP versus the annual plan. So, approximately how many working days would you actually require to get this advice back so that we could further consider?
It varies. It's how long a piece of string. Some of the stuff is very wide-ranging in terms of the depreciation funding. I think we already have the advice in the pack here. We wouldn't really be providing much more advice around depreciation. That probably wouldn't change. Some of these other things around essential services and defining that, there's quite a lot in there. We would do the best we can in the time available, is the short answer.
John, can you take a question? So the chair required you to put your amendment before lunch, and then he adjourns that we'd have lunch. How many of the people that have asked you questions now, how many of them talked to you during lunch to ask you these questions?
None, councillor.
Okay. So for context, we presume that people wanted to ask you now during the meeting on camera. Thank you.
Okay. All right, team. Councillor Newman finished? Yep. Okay. So, Mayor Brown.
Okay, I've got a question for the Chief Executive and a couple for Councillor Gillen. And I know this is raised with good intentions, but the road to purgatory is paved with those things. So, first of all, to the Chief Executive, in item E.2 raises a question here. I was rather hoping that we don't hire non-essential staff in the first place. Is there a policy of hiring people we don't need to have in place already?
No. Sorry to contradict Ms Baldock, but no, there's not.
Second one is in the independent things, we've got the officer or the Auditor General who ploughs through things. Would you dispense with him in favour of something else for this, or is it in addition to that? Because he costs us $170,000 a year as it is. Yeah.
I'm not sure, Mr Mayor, and I would have thought that actually this would be something that you might like to consider taking into your original motion. Actually, it's right up your alley, Mr Mayor, so I look forward to your support on it.
I think I'm kind of relying on the Officer Auditor General and the Value for Money Committee, but that's okay. But then my second question to you is, exactly why are you leaving local boards out of all this? Because they strike me as one of the potentially most bloated parts of our organisation and have never been under intense review. So I just want to know what is it that makes them kind of above this?
Well, thank you, Mr Mayor. You're kind of giving me a platform there because I've spoken many times on local boards and the fact that there's a power imbalance in the fact that the governing body controls their budget and often directs them on how they should be spending that, when under legislation we are supposed to have 21 semi-autonomous local boards controlling their budget. And it's not really for us to dictate what they spend it on, but to ensure they are fully funded to provide what their communities want. So I was conscious when writing this that I didn't want local boards to get trapped in this, especially when some of them are not, despite what we've seen in the information here, are not being fully funded their entitlement under the fairer funding formula.
Yeah. The Rodney board were very happy with Ferry funded last night, but even they were feeling quite well off. And I'm wondering the sorts of things that I wonder that might not come under the scope of the Paris. A good-looking glass might be free movie nights at great expense, or Sonnet Lumieres in Warkworth at great expense, of which is maybe 6 people watch it at a time. So I think that just excusing one department is a bit unfair. If we're going to look at everything, we should look. So you're suggesting that there's no possible savings in local boards. I find it very hard to believe. I'm not suggesting that they waste money more than anybody else, but well, the question was, why would we do that? Why are they above and beyond? I don't get it.
Mr Mayor, well, I think I have answered that. However, I'll add that, look, all of us are going to have opinions on what the local board prioritises for their spending, just the same as we all have opinions on what the governing body prioritises for their spending. However, to dictate to the local boards on how they must spend their pool of money, I mean, they are answerable to the people in those local areas. If they pay for movies and parks, and I've been a long supporter of movies and parks actually, but if they pay for movies and parks and it's a success, then fine. If it's a failure, that the people will speak to them about that. And the same on everything that the local boards put money towards. They are responding to their community needs as they see it. And I don't want them to be trapped within this. They have already received in your proposal effective cuts.
Councillor Fopina.
Sorry, Herman. I won't be asking any questions of the mover and the... No, I'm going to ask questions, Andy, of the mover and seconder, because they should have done their work when they put this amendment up. So, look, I know there's over 184,000 people in the Manukau ward. So my first part is to you, Mr. Mayor. Can you tell me that, or confirm or not, can you confirm or not that you had put in your mayoral proposal funds to cover the two targeted rates that the two local boards in the Manukau ward, through to you, Tamsin, that you put in funds to cover the targeted rate that they were looking at putting into the governing body. Can you just confirm that they have been covered?
Alf, can I just check, is that...
Hold on,
Sorry, Alf, I just need to clarify if the question's relative to this. I'm just finding difficulty, you might be able to help me, in relative to this amendment.
So why this question is relevant? The relevance to this question is that if we end up adopting this amendment, the impact of 184,000 people is going to be very, very big if this gets adopted. This is why I've got the partai, because the impact. And I see that we got one chair and we had the previous chair of the Otara Papatoetoe local board. This is why this is relevant, because we are talking about an amendment around replacing the mayoral proposal. So I hope that's clear. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor.
Kia ora, here, mana.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question, Councillor Filipaina. So I think just to clarify, I'm assuming that the local boards consulted on a targeted rate as a mechanism to cover their operating pressure. Yeah, and that the component that Councillor Filipaina is referring to is the mayoral proposal covering the 6 million shortfall of cost pressures across a range of local boards. So that those local boards would then no longer strike that rate because we are centrally covering the cost pressure. So that's what we're referring to, Councillor Filipaina?
Yeah, definitely, because I attended a workshop yesterday with the Otara Papatoetoe local board where this was discussed around removing the targeted rate that they ended up coming to this governing body and the budget committee in regards to their targeted rate. So this is why I asked earlier with the early agenda here, mana, to our two staff around local board impact. So if this is adopted, they then have to put that impact that they've lost or the funds they've lost onto the community.
So I can't speak for the amendment, but in terms of the mayoral proposal, that $6 million of cost pressure that some local boards are facing would be looked after centrally, and therefore for those and for those local boards, they would not need to look at striking that rate.
Kia ora, thank you. I've got also a partai, and maybe I'll go to the CEO. I know he's walked off, but it may well be for, sorry. Look, my my pātai is, and it may well involve Meredith, I want to have a look at Section 95 of the Local Government Act 2002. Under Section 95, there is a part there under subsection 6, each annual plan adopted under this section must, and it sort of lists things. One of them is prepared in accordance with the principles, procedures, etc., included in the long-term plan. I don't know whether you or anybody else can answer whether this amendment fulfills the obligations. There's 3 under subsection 6. That's really, I just wanted to find out whether this amendment covers what you must have in, I'll wait for Meredith.
Yes.
Suddenly you're essential.
You would be wise to wait for Meredith.
Through the chair, so that's really a question about the annual plan adoption point. So where we go from here is you make decisions in terms of the key elements in the annual plan, and then staff go away and they develop it up. And you've heard some information about how difficult that process and how truncated that process might be at this point in time. And then the legal team, we go through and we do a check, a compliance check against this, and then advise about the extent to which the final annual plan document meets these requirements.
Okay, Meredith, just a supplementary, because looking at those in front of us in red, looking at those, some of those there have an impact in regards to the current long-term plan we have. That's why I wanted to ask around subsection A of the Local Government Act. So, okay, kia ora.
And that just goes back to that question about significant and material differences from what's contained in the long-term plan.
Okay, and this last question may be to you, Ross. Ross, is there sufficient time, if depending on what happens with this, because I won't be voting for it, but dependent on what happens with this amendment, is there sufficient time to end up doing the work, which includes the implications for our community?
There isn't a lot of time. Our current plan is for you to agree the budget today, and then we would spend the next month preparing an annual plan document that meets all of the requirements in the Local Government Act, and those sections you've just referred to. If we compress that down, it gets harder and harder to produce all of those documents and articulate all those impacts in the plan. Trying to do public consultation before we adopt the plan and strike rates is probably not practical in that kind of time frame. The short answer is we would do what we can. We would make sure we comply with the law, but then it might be some things have to be considered throughout the course of next year. That then creates risk that they're not achieved, that the budget lacks a bit of credibility if we haven't solved how we're going to balance the budget we've created uncertainty about a range of these things. So we'll do the best we can in a short time, but practically speaking, time is really tight at this part of the process.
Yeah, so supplementary just to your whakaaro back is the fact that, and this is to Councillor Short's pātai earlier, is that you will try and comply with the law by going out for special consultation, as well as with the local boards, as well as interested communities, i.e. or e.g. Māori. Is that correct?
Yep. So we would have to give advice on each of these things, and then we'd have to consider, does this thing require consultation with the community? We would need to turn our mind to what discussion needs to occur with local boards. We would need to consider, what things require discussion with iwi, and work through each of those considerations for each part of this. It's a lot to do in a short space of time.
Councillor Filipino, I just want to briefly return to your question about the targeted rate. I'm not sure we answered that very crisply. Clause H in the amendment seeks to preserve the additional funding for local boards dealing with that shortfall. So, and that's why the targeted rate was dispensed with, because it was provided for elsewhere in the budget, and the amendment seeks to reinforce the Mayor's position on that aspect.
Kapai.
Thank you. Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Mr Chair, and a question to you, Councillor Gillen, if you don't mind, and it really goes to your notion up there of seeking, and the long list, but had the phrase identifying it, but not obviously not limited to all those points you came up with. And I'm just really wondering, in light of the commentary in regards of costs and savings that was made very recently by ex-CEO of CRL, Sean Sweeney, who was looking at facing question to do with costs, and of course everyone will be aware he said that the project could have been built for half the price or near enough, damn it. And he said, I probably didn't have the experience in building metro stations then, and this was in relation to the government asking to see if there's any savings. AT and KiwiRail came back and said they couldn't find anywhere to save money. I didn't have the expertise or the background to challenge them. If that was me now, I'd have reacted quite differently to it. And Mr Sweeney, of course, has gone on to manage now the $36 billion inland rail project in Australia. So is it your hope that out of that list, and that including but not limited to, in our budget of 5.3 billion operational and 3.7 billion capital works, that there indeed might be savings such as with Mr Sweeney that are there and that the CEO may be able to identify or at least put up as something to debate?
Yes, Councillor Watson.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Okay, well, thank you for fielding all those questions, Councillor Gillen, and staff for answering them as well. Oh, sorry, we'll move on now to the debate. And so I open it, if you could just, again, through the resolve system, just indicate that you'd like to speak to this amendment. Our first speaker is Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. Look, councillors, I really feel we should have given Councillor Gillen and Councillor Burns a bit of slack here. They are both new to the town hall table.
Slack or flack?
No slack. We're about to face potentially the highest rates rise in Auckland Council's history, and they have tried to put together something as an alternate. So I think, in fairness to you, I say well done. Thank you. Look, it's no secret I wanted to see a lower rates rise. And I'm sorry I haven't had a chance to talk to you at all about this, Councillor Gillen, although I have a little bit with Councillor Burns. But unfortunately, I want to talk to why I don't think it can be as low as 5.9% or a 2% reduction on what the Mayor has proposed. The Mayor's budget already absorbs well in excess of $200 million of financial pressure, probably about 213 million. Now that's close to the entire rates revenue of Hamilton City Council, which is the 5th biggest council in New Zealand. And it's bigger than the rates revenue of 73 out of 78 councils in New Zealand. How's that made up, 213? First, 106 million of operating savings, up 20 million on this year. We have never had a savings target that high, ever. But that's not all. On top of that, he's added 50 million to close the gap of operating funding, and that is things like utilities, KiwiSaver, the level crossing acceleration, things which we need. So he's absorbed that into the financial efficiencies. On top of that again, we've got the fuel crisis. There's a minimum of 25 million potentially 50 million or even higher. And remember, we use that fuel for our buses, for our ferries, to pick up our rubbish, to fuel our mowers, and other machinery that looks after our parks and reserves. Diesel, I saw this morning as I drove my EV to work, 3.20 a litre. Now it's down from 4, but it's still up pretty high. And there is no sign that it's going to get cheaper. On top of that again, he has absorbed $7 million of major events shortfall funding. And we know how much Aucklanders love those events. We are doing our bit to help. And I remind you, I haven't talked in that about debt or about the train set. I have just talked about the amount we are absorbing before we go to Aucklanders. And if I took that number and divided it by 30, which is a 1% rates rise, that's 7.1% of rates. That's already in the Mayor's proposal for financial efficiencies. What this amendment does is it adds another 60 million. So another 60 million to that figure means that we're staring down the barrel of well in excess of $250 million, actually well in excess of about 270 million, about 273 million, in 1 year. In 1 year. Now that's a figure we've tried to achieve in a whole term. I just want to give you an idea of the magnitude there. We also are at risk of going down on our credit rating. Any basis point added to our borrowing will be passed through to higher costs for us. Now, we are already on a negative watch, thanks to Moody's. Sorry, not thanks to Moody's. We're already on a negative watch, thanks to our alignment with central government, actually, with Moody's. Deferring depreciation shifts the rate's impact just 1 for 1 into the next year, kicking the can down the road. Councillor Gillan, Councillor Burns, I like some of your suggestions. I really do. In fact, I like them so much we've already started looking at them. And I've got quite a few of them, as you've heard from staff, on our list to help us find the 106. But it would be wrong for me to go through that list and say what I like and what I don't like, because the underlying factor, can I have a bit of extension of time, please? Yeah. Thank you. The underlying factor is you're adding 60 million to the already 213 million that we were finding. So to Councillors Gillans and Burns, you leave me sadly unable to support your amendment, just based on the magnitude of what your rates reduction would actually mean. $273 million of financial efficiencies. It's not just a mammoth hill to climb, it's $747,000 a day, almost $750,000 a day, every day for a year that we would have to find. Now, as good as our Chief Executive is, as good as our Chief Financial Officer is, and as good as your Value for Money Chair is, the risk and consequences of not achieving that target, for me, is simply too great. I'm sorry, I can't support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Burns, followed by Councillor Patterson-Hamlin.
Thank you, Chair. Rightio. So I think if we're being honest with ourselves, it's not a 7.9. For many Aucklanders, that figure is simply an average, and I think we forget to say that. In many parts of Auckland, particularly areas that have experienced significant property value shifts, residents are facing effective increases closer to 12 to 15%, which amazingly just under 1,000 Aucklanders are facing 50% or more due to the valuation redistribution. At a time when Aucklanders are already under immense pressure from mortgages, rent, insurance, food, cost of living, the people that are carrying the heaviest burdens in the Auckland region
are our elderly pensioners being raided out of homes they've lived in for decades, single parents trying to hold on to family homes, families who are asset rich but cash flow poor, working households already stretched to breaking point, small business owners battling rising costs and economic uncertainty. Over the past few weeks, I've received hundreds of emails, people stopping me in the street, messages and phone calls from residents. The message has been loud and clear that people are hurting. But one of the biggest concerns for me wasn't really about the proposal itself, but its complete failure of engagement and consultation across Auckland. Auckland Council spent approximately $300,000 on the annual pay and 1 month engagement, not including staff time allocated to this. What was the outcome of that? 12,147 pieces of feedback from a city of 1.82 million people. That should be an embarrassment to all of us. That is not a reflection of a successful engagement annual plan feedback. In the Howard ward alone, only 617 submissions were received from a population of 180,000 residents. The households in East Auckland is 42,000 families. That is not meaningful engagement. That is a disconnect between council and the people we represent. What concerns me even more is Auckland's demographic reality versus who's actually engaged. The ethnicity breakdown of the feedback was European 2,665, Māori 369, Pacifica 941, Asian 1,748, and Middle Eastern 174. Yet Auckland today is the most diverse, one of the diverse cities in East Auckland in the world. In areas like Howick and East Auckland, the Asian communities make up more than half our population, and across Auckland overall, the Asian communities now represent 32% of Auckland's population. Māori around 12.3, Pacifica around 16.6, with Europeans at 49.8. We need to be honest with ourselves about our communication, our engagement, and our marketing on this. Are we truly engaging properly? If we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars and only getting minimal participation from the public, particularly from many ethnic communities, then our consultation model is fundamentally broken. We should not be proud of these numbers. We should be deeply concerned by them. Leadership is not about digging our heels in when our residents are struggling. Leadership is about listening, adapting, and trying to work collaboratively to find a balance. I'm not afraid to find savings. In fact, I believe Auckland Council must become significantly more aggressive in identifying efficiencies before placing this level of pressure on households. Even reducing the increase by 1% requires us only to find 30 million in savings. Difficult? Yes, that is. Impossible? No, it's not. Even reducing this proposal from 7.9 to 6.9 would send a message to Aucklanders that voted us in that we are listening. That means that we're seriously reviewing Auckland transport efficiencies, our staffing and operational duplications, waste program costs and deliverables, grants and discretionary spending, better commercial and revenue opportunities, regional funding obligations, rate smoothing mechanisms. There's so many more that we could look into. I thank John for his amendment and all your work on what you've done. And I've had many conversations and open conversations with the Mayor and Phil and the Deputy Mayor and many others. And I thank you for your advice and your input. But realistically, you know, this is difficult with the time frame we have, but at the very least, we should be striving for something lower than 7.9. Because right now, too many Aucklanders feel ignored, disconnected, and financially overwhelmed, and clearly disconnected by the feedback that we got. And if we fail to listen now, we risk damaging the trust, which is very little at the moment, Auckland Council even has with the communities that we serve. Thank you. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Patterson-Hamlin.
Kia ora. Excuse me. So this budget that we're discussing today delivers savings that absorb a lot of the impact, as Deputy Mayor Simpson said, of the fuel crisis for ratepayers and residents, and in fact reduces the transport costs of a lot of Aucklanders, including those who will never use the CRL but who have less congested car journeys as a result. And that's really significant in the context that we're in today. So, I mean, none of us here wants to raise rates, right, if we don't have to, or to make those rises any more than they need to be. We don't, but we also don't want to leave council with a budget that's untenable or creates higher costs than it does savings. And what we're debating here, the amendment here is a $1.62 reduction in average rates, right? And I think it's important to put that in context. So the weekly cost of fuel for an Aucklander has gone up $25 since January this year. Groceries have gone up $13.80 for an average couple, $22.08 for a four-person household. Rents have gone up around $15 a week since 2025 to an average of just under $700 a week. According to figure.nz, the biggest cost of living pressure change has been in mortgages in Auckland, rising from around $475 to more than $650 a week in just 2 years. And the typical Auckland reality is $700 to $1,000 a week spent on mortgages. And for the sake of $1.62 a week, this amendment will risk enormous downstream impacts on the non-profit sector and on the local boards who then have to scramble to fill the gaps we leave, sacrificing the best ROI investment we have in this council, which will cost ratepayers money in the longer term, remove the requirement for new council buildings to have a Green Star rating, which will cost ratepayers money in the longer term, damage our credit rating, which will cost ratepayers money pretty much immediately. We're not here to make a decision that looks great in the next news cycle. We're here to make a decision that will work for Auckland this year and the years that come after it. This budget isn't without its risks, it being only 7.9%. We've been told that by rights the rates increase should be 15%, but we have heard what happened in consultation and we have done, frankly, I say royal we, the staff have done an incredible job of having a single-digit rates rise. And if you look in the national and international context, that is nothing short of a miracle. I don't want to raise rates any more than the coffee cart guy I see wanted to put 50 cents on the kids' hot chocolates, but I'm doing it for the same reason, because the organisation I serve, I want it to function and function well and sustainably and to still be functioning in 12 months' time. So we can choose to be despairing of a 7.9% rates rise and bemoan that the CRL doesn't have a station immediately outside our house, but I'm choosing to celebrate that the rates rises are as low as they are, given all of the context we've heard from staff today, given the national and international context, and celebrate how lucky we are to be alive right now in the greatest city in the world, to paraphrase Hamilton, that's about to get a whole lot greater with this coming-of-age moment that is the CRL. So I will be voting against this amendment and in favour of the mayoral proposal. Kia ora.
Thank you. Councillor? Councillor? Oh, so Councillor Winiata, followed by Councillor Turner, followed by Councillor Foley.
Thank you, Chair. Costs money to be a big city. I've seen and lived in a community that's on the end of rate increases that it doesn't want. But it was also on the end of rate increases not going up as they appropriately should have when the super city was around. So if you want any idea to have any idea of seeing what that looks like, it results in fairer funding coming around 15 years later, which is still not quite hitting the mark with what the community needs. It is a problem if Councillor Turner is feeling blocked or told that he's not looking at things correctly. We need complete transparency and quality guidance in order to move forward. But by comparison to other cities or territorial authorities, we're skating